And hello, fellow Rotarians. My name is Reed Miller, and I am your president of the Rotary Club of Portland. Welcome to our weekly membership meeting. I will now ask that you all join me in reciting the four-way test. Number one, is it the truth? Number two, is it fair to all concerned? Number three, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number four, will it be beneficial to all concerned? At this time, I'd ask any Rotarians who have invited a guest to please raise your hand so that you can introduce your guest to the club. If you're a visiting Rotarian who came on your own, please raise your hand and introduce yourself, or let us know that you're here in the chat box. I know Daniil has a few guests. Carol, do we have any other guests?
Not yet. Daniil, do you want to introduce your guests again?
Well, and I missed one. Reese, whom I don't, am I pronouncing that correctly? Whom I don't know, is also a ShelterBox ambassador, I gather. You all may not be ambassadors, but you're connected to ShelterBox and you're connected to our committees. Laura Helmer, you're with White Salmon Bingen now, I believe. Becky Saltzman, Becky, if you're in a club, I don't know which club you're in. And not okay, is an ambassador and one of our liaisons. Kerri Murray, I was mentioning to all of you, is in the Forest Grove Club and was just recently selected to be our district governor 2023-24. And Mike Robinson introduced himself, and you're in the Lewis River Club, correct? Yes, and the ShelterBox ambassador. And he put in his general territory, he put in the chat box for us all to see. And of course, Kerri Miller, president of ShelterBox USA, I'll be introducing her shortly.
Thank you, Daniil. And Bob Yingling is here visiting from the Gresham Club, if he gave a little wave there. So that's all I see right now. Reese.
Thank you so much, Carol. Welcome back, Bob. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. To all of our guests today, we are very excited to have you here. Thank you, Daniil, for the heavy lift bringing all these guests today. And of course, thank you to all of our members for joining us here today for another Zoom meeting. I want to start out the meeting today by thanking Terry Goldman for running our meeting last week while I was in Las Vegas for a work conference. I heard excellent reviews and I really appreciate the help. So thanks again to Terry Goldman. Round of applause. You may have noticed by now that my voice did not come back with me. That might be because after 4 days of working in Las Vegas, I had to fly to Miami for 4 days for a bachelor party. It was a rough job, but sometimes duty calls. So after my flight home on Sunday afternoon was delayed, then canceled, and then my next flight was delayed numerous times, then had to make an unplanned stop in Phoenix to refuel due to the West Coast storms. I eventually made it home at about 3:30 a.m. on Monday morning. So I apologize for my lack of voice and appreciate you all bearing with me. As a relatively new father, this was the longest I've been away from my family. And I have to tell you, I have never been happier to finally get home. After an exhausting week of travel, there is nothing more comforting than coming home to family. Being away for a long period of time can remind us all of how much we appreciate what is right in front of us. This reminded me of Terry Beard preaching to have an attitude of gratitude. We often get comfortable with what we have and forget how lucky we are to have it. I guess what I'm getting at is it shouldn't take distance to remind us to appreciate what we have. Don't get stuck in the monotony of the day-to-day grind. Remember what's important and cherish it every day like it could be the last day. Your loved ones deserve it, and so do you. Now, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge all of the Rotarians who joined the Rotary Club of Portland in the month of October. Happy Rotary anniversary to all of our Rotarians with an October Rotary anniversary. Thank you, Skylar. And I will now hand it over to our club president-elect, Maria Schell, for an announcement about an upcoming event. Maria.
Thank you, President Reed, and good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be with you today. A quick announcement, you've been hearing me do this every quarter. We are having our quarterly gathering to meet our new-ish members. So anyone who has joined in the last 18 months has been receiving personal invitations from me for this gathering. But I open up this opportunity to say that the goal of this is for them to get to meet each other as well as fellow Rotarians. So I'd love to have you join us. It is on November 4th, and it is from 4:30 to 6 at Hopworks Urban Brewery. It is the only place I could find big enough, outdoors with heaters. So not to worry, you will stay warm, we will stay safe, and you'll be able to have some wonderful opportunities for drinks and to meet fellow Rotarians. Last quarter when we met, we saw about 16 to 20 of us, both new members as well as our current members. And so I would just really encourage you, if you would like to come by on a Thursday afternoon, 4:30 to 6, stop by Hopworks Urban Brewery, the one over off of Southeast Powell. There's a nice big parking lot. So all the good things, beer, parking lot, outdoor for safety, heat for keeping you warm. So come enjoy. And we have so many wonderful members who have joined in the last 18 months. And due to COVID, they haven't had a great opportunity to meet all of us in person. So if you can take a moment on November 4th, please stop by. Back to you, President Reed.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you so much for putting that together. That sounds like the perfect venue. I very much look forward to that. I know we have tons of new members I've not had the opportunity to shake hands with, and certainly look forward to meeting them there. And now I would like to welcome Rotarian Dick Clark, who will be presenting this week's reflection. Please welcome Dick Clark.
Thanks, Reed. I'm always inspired by leaders, read a lot of autobiographies and biographies, and one that caught my attention in the mid-90s was Colin Powell's autobiography, which of course he recently passed away. And this is an excellent book if you're looking for a book about his early career. And of course, he went on to become Secretary of State and had a storied career in the military. And at the end of the book, he summarizes many of his life lessons into what he calls Colin Powell's rules. And they're just short statements, which I think are really great statements for us all to consider living by. So let me just read you these short statements. Number one, it ain't as bad as you think. It'll look better in the morning. Number two, get mad, then get over it. Number three, it can be done. Number four, be careful what you choose, you may get it. Number five, don't let adverse facts stand in the way of a good decision. Another one is check the small things. Share credit. Remain calm. Be kind. Don't take counsel of your fears or naysayers. And the last rule that he lived by, perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. I think in these challenging times, keeping it simple and remaining positive, as Colin Powell did during his lifetime, is really important for everyone, especially Rotarians. Thanks, Reed.
Thank you so much, Dick. I love that. I love all of those, and I absolutely agree. I think that's wonderful advice. Keep it simple, stay positive, and always move forward. So thank you so much again, Dick. And again, if any of you are interested in giving a reflection in the future, you can reach out to Susan, who's in charge of scheduling the reflections, and her email is 2navycaptains@gmail.com, and will be dropped into the chat by Skylar momentarily. Thank you so much, Skylar. Now it is time for a breakout room with a few of your fellow Rotarians. And I'll remind you, when you enter the breakout room, please introduce yourselves to the others in the group. As always, you are more than welcome to chat openly with your fellow Rotarians. But if you need a topic of discussion for your breakout room, my suggestions would be, what are you most grateful for when you get home? Another option, feel free to share a horror story from your past travels. We've all been there before. Remember, the point of these breakout rooms is to simulate a live meeting when we would traditionally have the opportunity to chat with fellow Rotarians. The idea is have some fun, enjoy chatting with your fellow Rotarians. We'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. And I look forward to chatting. Thank you. All right, and welcome. I remind you all that we are streaming live on Facebook right now, and I want to welcome our special guest, District Governor Jim Boyle. Thank you so much for being here with us. He missed the introductions at the beginning, but what a pleasure to have him with us here today. And I hope you all had great conversations in your breakout rooms and enjoyed the opportunity to interact with your fellow Rotarians. Now, please welcome Rotarian Danielle Banks as your chair of the day. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, everyone, and greetings on this little overcast Tuesday. You know, shelter is critical in reducing the spread of COVID-19. And while COVID has made their work more challenging, the global relief efforts of ShelterBox has shown their commitment to providing displaced families with a place to call home throughout this outbreak. Their work responding to disasters and crisis situations doesn't pause because of a pandemic. During this new humanitarian disaster, the importance of shelter has never been clearer. And while their work doesn't always make the headlines, ShelterBox has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize twice, in 2018 and 2019, for its relief efforts in some of the world's most extreme conflict zones. Our speaker today, Kerri Murray, serves as president of ShelterBox USA, the official disaster relief charity project partner of Rotary International. Since 2009, she has worked in disaster relief, often serving on the front lines of crisis situations. Kerri is back with us today to tell us what she is thinking about rethinking the role of shelter. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Kerri Murray, President of ShelterBox USA.
Thank you. And thank you, Danielle. It is so wonderful to see all of you today. Thank you for coming. It's wonderful to be back. The last time I was with you, it was at the hotel in downtown Portland. And that was several years ago, and a very different world for us back then. This was way before COVID-19. And I want to just say a special thank you and hello to also our ambassadors. So Janine and Laura, I know we've got Reese, our SRT member. It's wonderful to see all of you here today. The Rotary Club of Portland has been a long supporter of the global humanitarian relief efforts of ShelterBox. And before I get started, I want to make sure, first and foremost, I acknowledge the work that you've done to support this effort. And I would say for a disaster relief organization, it's really the worst day ever that people care about the work of ShelterBox. And it takes a large catastrophic emergency for people to really learn about us often, to call us up and to make a charitable contribution. But quietly, the Rotary Club of Portland has been supporting our organization for years. And it's really been a huge catalyst to enable ShelterBox to be able to scale and serve more families displaced around the world. So far, since we got going 21 years ago, ShelterBox has brought emergency shelter to over 2 million people around the world. It took us 15 years to reach the first million, and it took us the next 5 years to reach the second million. So we really have been working to increase our scale and decrease our impact around the world. And so what I am here to do today, in addition to giving an update on our work, I want to present the club with your Gold Hero Award. And so, Danielle, thank you for having me. This is really for every single member of the club who's really dug deep to make this happen for ShelterBox, but we are going to be acknowledging, and I'll be officially sending you your Gold Hero Award for ShelterBox for your extraordinary support in 2021. So as a humanitarian relief organization, ShelterBox is really working to tackle one of the biggest issues that's plaguing our world today. And it's this massive displacement of people. And actually, I was just talking about it with Andrew in our breakout room, and we were talking about chronic homelessness and the situation of your region. But really, one of the biggest problems facing our world is this massive displacement of people. And it's people who've been displaced by natural disaster and conflict situations. And right now, there are more people displaced in our world than any time in recorded history. It's 112 million people. And it's people that are displaced by cyclones, tsunamis, earthquakes, flood situations, and then civil unrest. And actually, conflict is the largest driver and the fastest driver of displacement in our world today. And ShelterBox is working in both situations. About half of our work is in emergency shelter for disasters, and the other half is in these long, protracted crisis situations. So many of you, we've set up the tent before at your club. I know many of you have seen a classic ShelterBox before. And 21 years after we were founded, and we were founded by Rotarians, and these were volunteers who came together, who saw a massive need for one of the basic needs that all of us have as humans, and that's for emergency shelter. And they set up 21 years ago the first shelter boxes. And we still do deploy shelter boxes today. And the basic premise for why they exist has stayed the same all of these years. And it's, what are the things that you need to sustain your life if you lose everything in an instant and you're forced to flee your home? And this is really the center of gravity is the shelter, and it often takes the form of an emergency shelter tent. And there's a variety of different tents that we deploy. The one in the box is the standard relief tent. But the other things that you think about in these situations that are essential to set up household include clean water, so water purification, solar lanterns when you've lost power. It happens in so many of these disasters. Cook sets, so aid organizations are bringing in food, but having basic equipment to be able to prepare a hot meal, boil water, and then basic things like blankets, ground mats, tools, mosquito nets, the essential things to set up a household. So the shelter, as well as the basic things to get you going again. And Danielle talked a bit about COVID in the beginning, and I'm going to share with you a lot more of our work during the past year and a half during the pandemic. But I'll tell you, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's a conflict situation, or now this global pandemic, shelter is truly one of the most transformational differences we can make in someone's life. And it is truly the first step in the recovery process. So you've seen the shelter box. There are other aid items that are also very much important to the overall aid packages that we provide around the world. One of those items is a shelter kit. And actually, we provide many more shelter kits today than we even do shelter boxes. And this is a very low cost, high impact kit. And from that bag, you can create a single room structure. So it contains the tarpaulins, the tools, the fixins to help repair a home that's been damaged, or actually create a single room structure. And in the field, we often really adapt these shelter kits with other items that we can procure locally. So it could be basic framing, it could be things like corrugated iron, it could be mud brick. And so there's an infinite number of ways that that kit can be utilized. And we're deploying thousands of these kits today and as a result of the earthquake in Haiti that devastated Lakai 2 months ago. We're just finishing up the distributions that we sent shelter kits in that situation. But whether it's a tent, whether it's a tarp, whether it's essential NFIs, whether it's cook sets, lights, water purification, it's the basic framework to set up a household and resume life again. So right now, ShelterBox is really actively working around the world in some of the highest waves of displacement in our world. So the largest and fastest growing places for displacement in the world are in places like Burkina Faso, in Ethiopia. We're working still in Syria. We're approaching our 10 years now of ShelterBox responding to help internally displaced people within Syria. We're starting a project now in Yemen, and that has been a massive need for shelter in that country. We're just finishing up a deployment in Haiti following the earthquake in August. We're working across the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin of Africa as well, which is also seeing some very, very high waves of displacement today. So the importance of shelter and reducing the spread, it's crucial. So there's a lot of talk about health. There's a ton of talk about hygiene, but shelter is really one of the most important factors in mitigating the spread of this disease. And I think we all know how important our home has been to our safety and well-being over the past year and a half. And for tens of millions of people in our world, they don't have that luxury of a place to call home. And COVID has made things a lot more complicated in many of these places. So we've made a lot of adaptations to the ShelterBox, just overall aid package of the past year. We've had to work very differently than we've worked in the past, and we've had to do everything we can to keep people safe. And so we've made a lot of modifications. One modification to our aid package is including things like hygiene supplies. So hand washing basins, soap, making sure we've got sanitizers, masks. We're also really ensuring that we improve social distancing. So rather than really distributing to hundreds of families per day, it's a maximum of 50 people a day. But basic things to keep people safe and to ensure that, one, we're not doing anything to increase the spread, and we're doing everything we can to protect people who've been displaced. So that includes, normally we deploy people like Reese, our response team members, all over the world to natural disaster zones. And we started doing that again after the Haiti earthquake. But there was a period of over a year when it was nearly impossible for us to deploy via our typical model. So we had to rely on our trusted partners. We have several partners around the world. Rotary International is perhaps our largest. And we also have other partners like Habitat for Humanity, the Red Crescent Societies, groups like CARE, different partners in different countries, particularly for the protracted crisis that we respond to. So we had to do a lot of our training the same way that you're meeting today via Zoom. This is an example of instructing our partners in Tanzania on how to use the shelter kit during our deployments there last year. We've also had to really adapt to meet some of the emergent needs, and that includes supporting emergency services. So in places like the Philippines, where we have registered as an NGO, we have a warehouse, we have local staff, we were called upon to actually provide our shelter kits to serve as triage facilities. And this is an example of one of those. This is outside of a hospital where emergency services were overwhelmed and they needed more really triage facilities for patients coming in with COVID-19. So we provided our shelter kits to be used as triage facilities during COVID-19. I want to share with you a few stories, and this is one of the families that ShelterBox has been able to support over the past year with your help. And we are working extensively in an area of the world called the Lake Chad Basin of Africa. And when you look on the Human Development Index, these are some of the poorest countries on the planet. And we are working extensively in a camp in Cameroon that is home to many Nigerian refugees that are fleeing Boko Haram violence. Now, the Minuau camp is now home to over 70,000 refugees. And many of these displaced families are women and children. And this is Fan, and she was displaced at the beginning of the COVID crisis. Her husband was injured in the attack in Nigeria, and she was forced to flee with just her children. And when she arrived at the Minowao refugee camp in Cameroon, she was taken to what's really called a collective or a transit center. And these are places that are very crowded, that are basically holding facilities as they process you through into the camp, where you're likely to spend for these kids probably a generation. And so Fan was in an overcrowded collective center and no ability to protect her family from COVID-19. And our role in this camp is really critical because ShelterBox is the only provider of tents to new arrivals at the camp. So Fan was able to move her family into a shelter, and you see it behind her. And she received a plot of land from the government in the camp, and she received her ShelterBox tent as well as a custom NFI pack that enabled her to set up household. But she told our partners during the monitoring and evaluation that this was really crucial for her. Having a shelter was the first step in their recovery, and it enabled her to get a job. And now she collects wood and she sells it for food for her children, and she's beginning to work again, and her children are getting back to school. But this is what shelter does for so many of these families, is it really is the first step in their recovery process to be able to continue the next step of a long, long road to recovery for these families that have been displaced from their countries. In the past year, we've also been able to respond earlier this year in Honduras after Hurricanes Eta and Iota made landfall and devastated many parts of Honduras. We worked extensively with Rotary clubs in San Pedro Sula that helped with this response. And this was actually a warehouse that Rotary had donated for us to be able to put our supplies in as we repack these kits. But you can see the shelter boxes and in the kitchen sets and the aid that was going to be going to 2,000 displaced families in Honduras. And these are some of these photos. So since 2000, I mentioned we've been able to bring shelter to over 2 million people. It's now 100 countries and over 300 disasters. We work with several different partners around the world, but we remain the official project partner of Rotary International in emergency response. And that is a very big deal for our organization. Nearly 100% of our natural disaster responses have the aid of Rotarians locally on the ground who help us with these responses when disasters strike. How it's possible, I think, especially with Reese here, I'd love to share more about a lot of, I think, the quiet heroes that make this work possible. But when we were founded, our founders created a disaster relief training program where we train civilian volunteers. The training program can take nearly a year between remote trainings and online trainings, as well as live mock deployments. And it is not an easy process to go through. 1 in 30 people will make it through the response team training and become a ShelterBox response team member. These folks are crucial to our ability to do the work around the world. They deploy to the front lines of disasters. And again, we just started deploying our response team members again, most recently in the Haiti response for the earthquake in August of this year. And they travel to the front lines, they conduct assessments, they work locally with our partners to determine who's been effective, what are the shelter needs, how many people can we help. They work through the logistical constraints of getting the aid in. They help train communities on how to utilize the aid, put up the shelters, and they also conduct monitoring and evaluation to really map and track the impact that the work has around the world. And they are a massive tie that binds our ability to do this work. And Reese, thank you for your service. We couldn't do this work without this army of highly trained volunteers around the world that serve on the front lines for ShelterBox. So some notable deployments, I mentioned Haiti. Our biggest natural disaster response in our history was actually after the 2010 earthquake, which displaced 1.5 million people in an instant. the Philippines. This is really, I would say, the center of climate emergencies on our planet today. It's Typhoon Alley. They suffer an inordinate amount of typhoons, and we established a local presence. We're registered as a nonprofit. We have local staff. We pre-positioned 6,000 households worth of shelter at any given time that we can draw down on, so we can work fast and efficiently in that country. Syria, this has been the longest piece of our work in our history. We're entering our 10th year in responding in Syria. And right now we are in the midst of actually getting our aid in for what we call our winterized shelter kits. And the winter is a really awful and horrible time to live in Syria. It's a country of extreme weather, very cold, and we are doing everything in this country from providing shelters, carpets, blankets, mattresses, and including children's clothing. We do baby onesies and basic essential things to really keep families who've been internally displaced alive through what's likely to be a very harsh winter in Syria. And so over the past 10 years, we've brought emergency shelter and supplies to over 500,000 people who've been affected by the Syrian crisis. I've mentioned to you on the Lake Chad Basin of Africa, this continues to be a massive piece of our work. This is just a demonstration of all of the tents within the Minnow camp. Every one white dot is a ShelterBox tent that we've provided. And I'd like to really finish up, and then I'll take questions with one of the stories from the Minnow camp, another family that we've been able to support. And this is Esther. Esther was 14 years old when she was forced to flee. The violent group Boko Haram stormed her village in Boko, Nigeria in the middle of the night. And they really brutally killed her father, her brothers, and they raped and murdered her mother. And Esther was one of the few girls that made it out that night. And she made it to the border of Cameroon, where she was taken to the refugee camp, the Minnow camp. And she was a recipient of a ShelterBox tent as well as an aid package. And she's been now long-term displaced within the camp. And this is another group of refugees that we're also supporting, are people who've been long-term displaced within the camp. But Esther, while she has a very difficult story, she has been able to make a life for herself within the camp. And she was able to take a sewing class, which she said changed her life. And she's become the best seamstress in her block of the camp in Minnow. And she has been able to marry. She has 2 children. And she is indicative of really the type of families that we work to find in our world that really need our support. And she received tarpaulins and an aid package from our organization. And we continue to help in Minnow camp, not just newly displaced, but the long-term displaced as well. Just a few things that I'll mention. We have a very large event each year. It's taking place next Thursday, and it's called our Evening to Experience ShelterBox. And it's a 1 hour of inspiration that we're making available online, and it will be a remote event. And I would like to invite all of you to attend. And Danielle, I'll send you a virtual invitation, but we are actually going to travel to the front lines during this hour of inspiration and let you meet some of these families and hear from them firsthand the work of the organization. So I'm excited to invite you to that. It's on November 4th on Thursday. It's from 5 to 6 Pacific time. And again, just a big thank you to the Rotary Club of Portland. You've done so much. It's exciting to be able to recognize you with a Gold Hero Award this year. I've included my email address at the bottom, so please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And Danielle, if you want to open up the lines and allow people to ask questions, I'd be happy to take any questions you have. Yes, Mike.
Mr. Pendergast.
All right, thank you, Kerri. Given the nature of the frontline workers that only 1 in 30 make it, it sounds like a shoe-in attractive option for vets who might have lost their way or be looking for some direction or some mission after having served overseas. I wonder if that would be appealing to them. and whether that's a specific group that you target.
Yes, I think it probably would be very appealing to them. And actually, we have a member of the SRT team that's based down in Santa Barbara, and he is ex-military and he was a logistician in the Marines and came to us after his service. So yes, I think that it's something that probably, as we work to really scale up this program, I do believe that's probably a group that's ripe for our response team program.
Chris has a question.
So interestingly, you mentioned that the one woman in the African camp was supporting herself by collecting firewood. And I know you have a stove that goes with some kits. How aggressive are you being in terms of distributing fuel efficient stoves, since the areas around those camps will become rapidly defoliated just by the nature of what's going on?
Well, hi, Chris. It's nice to see you. Right now, we actually are not deploying the stoves any longer. So it's been quite a few years since we've deployed the stoves out to the field. Although, you know, it's not to say that sometimes families wouldn't purchase them. We are, as adjunct to some of our shelter kits, like in Haiti right now, we are doing very small cash allotments for people to buy the other household items that don't come in the kit that they need, but we are no longer distributing the stoves any longer.
Thank you. Kate, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you. Thank you for being here and talking with us today, Kerri, and giving us updates. On one of your slides, you had you showed that ShelterBox is a part of the UN shelter cluster, I think it was called. What does that mean? Is there a benefit to being a part of that? Just what does that mean?
Oh, massive. So basically, the UN has created a structure around really delivering and the coordination and efficient distribution of humanitarian aid. And so it's called the cluster system. And we feed into the shelter cluster. And so all these humanitarian actors, obviously what we don't want to do is we want to really not duplicate efforts. We want to work in coordination, and we want to work most efficiently and effectively. So we work within the cluster system around the efficient and effective really distribution of humanitarian aid. So there's different streams that exist, but for ShelterBox, like Habitat, Red Cross, we all fit within the shelter cluster. There are other clusters as well. So you can have, wash and sanitation, you can have food security, but we feed up into the UN system that's called the shelter cluster. And then in natural disasters, we work through that system. And then in conflict situations, we work through a system called through the UNHCR. And very similarly, we coordinate within the UNHCR system, particularly in camp management. And they help to notify us of precisely what our role is and what we're going to need. And we work within the cluster system, and we often partners with lots of other actors that also sit within that same cluster.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dick Clark, you have a question.
Kerri, thanks for your presentation. Great program. Here in the Northwest, as you know, we're preparing for the possibility of a major earthquake. Do you ever sell these shelter boxes to, like, on the retail market for folks that aren't experienced in a natural disaster currently, but want to prepare for one in the future?
Well, it's interesting, Dick, because I got a call, my first call from them, FEMA, about 5 years ago. They were doing a planning exercise around Cascadia. And they said it wasn't if, it was when a massive disaster was going to kill thousands and displace many more than that in the US. And emergency shelter and shelter in place was going to be essential. And so they learned about ShelterBox, and they reached out and said, this is precisely what we may need in a disaster to drop into disaster zones. And so while we don't sell them, we are looking at ways in which we could really help. We could help in situations where there is a massive displacement. In the US, it's the exception, not the rule, that we deploy here. The last time we deployed in the US was because FEMA called us to help fill gaps after Hurricane Harvey in late 2017. But I think that this is something that, you know, increasingly is of interest to ShelterBox, particularly ShelterBox USA, and how can we be helpful in a catastrophic emergency. So I think that, you know, this is something that continues to be something that I'm looking strategically at how we can help fill gaps here in our own country in the case of a catastrophic emergency. But that's still a long way off for us to be able to meet the needs of folks here in the US.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kerri. And I'm going to turn it back over to Reed now. If you have other questions, I'm sure that we can follow up at a later time. Thank you, Reed.
Thank you so much, Carol, and thank you so much, Kerri.
Thank you.
And I do want to take a moment to give a little bit of time here to introduce our district governor, who we are honored to have with us today, Jim Boyle. Please give a huge virtual round of applause and welcome District Governor Jim Boyle for a quick announcement.
Thank you very much, President Reed. Kerri, and also it's great to see you and thank you for your presentation. Look forward to seeing you in May in Seaside. I just wanted to share with you that I'm looking forward to speaking with the Rotary Club and sharing some insights on January 18th. And also your president, Reed, has been instrumental in working with the district and coordinating a district-wide day of service on Saturday, April 30th, 2022. So we're working and coordinating with the 24 different affiliates of Habitat for Humanity, and certainly we'll share more with the Rotary Club of Portland. And thank you for all the things that you do on behalf of Rotary, and thank you for supporting everyone. It's greatly appreciated. Thanks, President Reed.
Thank you so much, Jim. What an honor to have you with us today. And we very much look forward to partnering with you and the rest of the district and the Habitat for Humanity in April. Excited for the opportunity. Thank you very much for organizing that. And we will certainly be patiently waiting for some upcoming announcements on that event. So thank you very much, Jim. And next week, we'll be meeting right here back on Zoom at noon on Tuesday, November 2nd. Next week's presentation will be from Scott Kerman, Executive Director of the Blanchet House, who will be coming to speak about the wonderful work his organization is doing in the Portland community. Please don't forget, if you have a speaker idea, please reach out to Deb Dion, who is the chair of our program committee. We are always looking for great program ideas, and our programs depend on our members taking the initiative. I'd like to thank all of our guests who joined us today. You are all more than welcome to come back anytime. Thank you so much to Daniil for bringing in all of the wonderful guests today. Thank you to Dick Clark for today's very thoughtful reflection. Many of those snippets of positivity will certainly stick with me throughout the day and throughout the year. Thanks again to today's chair of the day, Daniil. And of course, thank you so much, Kerri Murray, for your presentation today. But more importantly, thank you so much for all of the incredible work that you and the ShelterBox continue to do around the world. The work you are all doing is truly inspirational.
Thank you, Reed.
Lastly,
So nice to
thank you. And lastly, I'd like to thank everybody behind the scenes that help our programs run so smoothly. Thank you to Skylar, Carol, and everybody else that contributes to the production. And most importantly, thank you to all of our committee chairs and to our members for everything that you do for our club and for our communities. As we close today's meeting, let's all remember why we're here. We serve to change lives. Let's continue to focus on the lives that we change, and continue to step up and to do the right thing. Thanks again for joining. This meeting is adjourned.